but it is enormously easy to do, actually, to do that and to do these sort of spark astroturfing campaigns where you make something appear to be kind of a groundswell, even when it isn't.
Angus, so great to have you on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so where are you seeing examples of astroturfing in Canada?
So there's a few different places you're going to come across it. The most obvious ones are the major kind of social media platforms. So specifically kind of like Facebook, Instagram, X. What you're going to see on these platforms is accounts that maybe you don't recognize, groups maybe you don't recognize, posts. And there's just a lot of information manipulation going on across these platforms. And there's a lot of people trying to convince you that something exists or some attitude exists that isn't actually real or doesn't represent a large number of Canadians.
So give me an example.
So there was this really interesting kind of case of a Facebook group with about 20,000 members that was sort of Canadians for 51st statehood. And it was this real kind of, okay, so 20,000 Canadians are supporting this. And this kind of sort of a group that was active almost immediately after sort of Trump began joking, not joking about that. And if you go into the group and you kind of look at the history of the group, it's immediately apparent that it's actually not 20,000 Canadians who believe that. And instead, it's an old Facebook group that got purchased or sold or repurposed and changed its name from actually just a buy and sell group. So it used to be a buy and sell group. If you scroll down far enough, years and years, you're going to see, couches for sale, house for rent. And then all of a sudden there's this switch and it's all hyper political content, very polarizing, and a smaller number of people posting, a lower level of engagement. But it's a great example of where if you were just scrolling by and you looked at that and you went, oh, 20,000 Canadians, okay, like it's not a huge number, but it's enough to sort of take note. But actually, it's not 20,000 Canadians. It's just a few. Look, there's marketplaces where you can buy social media engagement. You can buy bots, you can buy groups, you can buy campaigns. There is a whole marketplace around marketing, but also political use of social media. Now, those accounts get blocked eventually. That's against the terms of service. The platforms generally don't want you doing that. But it is enormously easy to do, actually, to do that and to do these sort of spark astroturfing campaigns where you make something appear to be kind of a groundswell, even when it isn't.
Why do you think, Angus, that this works so well?
You're hijacking this sort of fundamental human idea. You're this impulse. We're social creatures. We care what our fellow citizens think. It's the same idea as if you kind of read a public opinion poll and you think, oh, okay, the majority of Canadians think this. What you're trying to tap into is our desire to identify with our co-citizens or our neighbors. And so if you can make somebody believe that the community around them thinks a certain way, even if they don't, it becomes very easy to start to believe that too.
But who is behind that, Angus? And is there a specific goal? I know we're talking about many different campaigns, but is there a goal?
There's sort of two big drivers of this. One is money. And we've seen that a lot in the Canadian context. We saw it with massive amounts of ads that run across X and Meta to this day that are sort of engaged in crypto scams using political content. What they're trying to do is to mobilize kind of people's attention and engagement in online spaces. And they're trying to monetize that, trying to cash in on online influence and the way that system works. So money is one obvious one, but of course there's political campaigns as well. And there's using social to try to convince people. And generally the people engaged in this might not think of themselves as doing something deceitful or manipulative. They're running a marketing campaign. Everyone else is doing it. This is just the way politics works right now. There's infinite justifications for why you're engaging in this behavior. But at the end of the day, ultimately what you're trying to do is to convince people of something that isn't true, or to convince people of something you want, but is not necessarily in their interests.
In your report, you pointed out some, I remember seeing some pictures from Alberta about the Alberta separatism campaign. From Ontario, we're watching from this side thinking, how many people in Alberta actually want to separate? Is it a big group? Is it a small group? What did you find about that?
Yes, the Alberta separatism is sort of a very distinct kind of thing. And there are many Albertans who feel deeply unsatisfied with the state of the Federation and have grievances and are interested in expressing that online and campaigning for that. And in fact, that's sort of a part of a healthy democracy, and that's what you want. The issue becomes if people are trying to profit off of it, or are trying to manipulate people, or are trying to astroturf their fellow Albertans into thinking that there's this mass movement. And in fact, there actually has been a lot of confusion in some of these online communities that we've been witnessing over a little while, where when push comes to shove and you really get into it, the number of Albertans who actually support secession is very low, but in their online communities it's very popular. And so you get this sort of like disbelief, and you get some of this in responses to polling numbers during elections as well, where there's this sense that like, oh, the polls can't possibly be right, they're lying to me, because in my community everyone wants to separate. How is it even possible that this is the real polling number? And so in the Alberta case, we looked into it. In general, what we found is mostly authentic participation, but that authentic participation still represents a very small percentage of the Albertan population, most of whom strongly support staying in Canada.
Angus, why should Canadians be worried about this?
So Canadians are part of a democracy and care about their democracy. And ultimately, what you want in a democracy is a free and fair exchange of ideas with people who share your hope and your desire for a better future. The problem with astroturfing is it attacks that. So when you go online, which is now the primary place where people conduct politics and communicate about politics, and you don't know if the person who's saying they're Canadian is actually Canadian, and you don't know if they're trying to sell you something or convince you of something that isn't true, how can you actually, in good faith, engage in politics? How can you trust the system? How can you have hope for the future of your country? So astroturfing really attacks some of these integral principles of democracy, and every Canadian should be worried about that.